It is 10 o'clock. We only have a few people, hopefully more start rolling in. So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar Wednesday. My name is Sharon and I'm with SIPA, your Colorado Government Authority, helping you get more information and services online. In today's webinar, Propeller will be sharing a case study of product development and process improvement with the Colorado Department of Early Childhood. Before we get started, please go ahead and turn on captioning if you need or desire, and note that during this webinar you are muted. If you have any questions or would like to communicate with the presenters at any time, please just use the chat box or the Q&A feature. We will unmute everyone at the end for any remaining questions. We'll also have some poll questions for you to answer during the presentation and a post-webinar survey, and we deeply appreciate your feedback. Please join me in welcoming Allison Torpy, Rose Barklow, Jillian Tongate from Propeller, and Sabina Anderson from CDEC. We appreciate their time and look forward to what they have to present. Also on the call is SIPA's Sales and Marketing Director, Beth Justice, if you have any questions for us. Thank you all for joining us today. And with that, I will turn it over to our guests.
Thanks so much, Sharon. We're happy to be here. My name is Allison Torpy. I lead Propeller's Denver office. Propeller is a management consulting firm focused on leading transformational initiatives for organizations in both the public and the private sectors. I'll do a quick introduction for myself before passing it over to Rose and Sabina, who are going to lead the bulk of the presentation today. I've been with the Propeller for over 10 years now. You'll see in a couple slides, Propeller itself is only 12 years old, so I've been around for most of the lifespan of the firm. I started at Propellers where we're headquartered in Portland and moved to Denver almost 6 years ago to help start our Denver office. I've been really excited to partner with many of you all and your colleagues across the public sector in Colorado over the last several years. And I'm really looking forward to sharing our perspective on product development and product management in the coming hour. Rose.
Awesome. Thanks, Allison. Yeah, my name is Rose Barklow, and I'm a human-centered design consultant here in the Propeller office in Denver. I have been with Propeller for 2 years, and my previous experience has all been in the public sector, both at the state level and the local level, as well as the K-12 school district. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about the work we've done at Universal Preschool. I'll pass it over to Sabina.
Thank you so much, Rose. Hi, I'm Sabina Anderson, Chief Product Officer here at CDEC. I have been with CDEC working from a product management perspective since March, but joined full-time as Chief Product Officer about a little bit over 2 months ago. And majority of my career has actually been spent in private sector. So I have been incorporated very different sizes, industries, all in very complex type of technology with user experience being a main focus. And I'm bringing in a lot of private sector thinking into public sector product management. So really excited to share with y'all what we have been working on for the last couple of months.
Fantastic. Thanks both. So today we're going to give just a brief overview of Propeller for those of you that aren't familiar with the firm. Then Sabina will talk about building a product-based organization and the amazing work that she's spearheaded at CDEC and how you all that might apply to the rest of you here. And then Rose will talk about how that, a little more tactically, actually, what we did and how Propeller partnered with CDEC in a case study for a universal preschool specifically. We'll close with questions, but of course, please feel free to drop questions in the chat at any time. Sharon's monitoring the chat, and we're ready to pause and answer your questions as we go along the way as well. So with that, a little bit about Propeller. I mentioned that the firm itself is only 12 years old, headquartered in Portland. We now have offices in the Bay, Denver, of course, Dallas, and Minneapolis. We have about 160 employees now. And one thing that I think is really interesting for perhaps a lot of you here is that we're really proud to say that we're women-owned, a women-owned business. In terms of our public sector work specifically, we've worked with over 50 public sector clients in the 12 years that we've been in business, completing, nearly 250 public sector projects across those clients. You can see screenshots for some of the public sector clients that we've worked with in the Denver metro area or in the state of Colorado here on the slide. Of course, CDEC, City and County of Denver, City of Wheat Ridge, Department of Revenue, et cetera. I won't read them all. You can see the logos for yourself. And then below, we've just got sort of a menu of how we deliver value for our public sector clients and just some high-level buckets in terms of the work that we do. So, sort of standard portfolio program and project management. If there's any sort of like system implementation or process optimization, that's where that sort of work would fall in. Rose is here to kind of represent our human-centered design practice and the work that falls in that user experience and human-centered design bucket. Really thinking about how do we engage our constituents and optimize their interaction with our communities and our organizations. Third column is Propeller does a great deal of work in the kind of people strategy and change management space. So, it's one thing to configure a tool and roll out a system, but if people aren't brought along the journey and know how to use the system and understand why we're making these enhancements, then they're not going to do it, or it's not going to be used as intended. And so that change management and people strategy is really, really, really important. And then finally, I think something that a lot of us are talking about every day these days is data and specifically AI strategy and enablement. And so Propeller does have a deep practice in that space as well. Anything from data strategy to AI strategy and enablement, to data governance, to dashboarding and data visualization is what would fall in that fourth bucket there. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Sabina to take it away and talk about her kind of philosophy and experience with building a product organization.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Allison. So we are going to start off with kind of like the basics. What is product management? And product management really comes with so many different factors to it. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about like what are some of the foundational components of product management, and especially how it applies to CDAC. But in general, product management is the practice of strategically overseeing the development of products to ensure it meets user needs and aligns with organizational goals. And what does that actually mean? It basically means that we are trying to understand our users to basically deliver what is value to them. And this also needs to make sure that it goes alongside with what are the organizational goals that maybe your agency, department have, because as much as we want to be able to understand our users and always develop to our users, if we don't have a good strategy in place, it can kind of go and diverge into many different ways because there's so many people that want every single thing, right? So once we have basically understood our users, we have to make sure we also are defining what is that product strategy, vision, and roadmap. So what we are trying to accomplish is to kind of provide a clear direction and align in the different teams and stakeholders to make sure that we are going in the same direction. Because let's say that you might have multiple products in your product portfolio. Are they all aligning towards the same goals, or are these products basically being developed in different directions? So you want to make sure that you are creating a product strategies that are aligning with your organization, your department, your agency. And then thirdly, one thing that is a key part to product management is to be able to understand, are you actually delivering value? Because there are so many things that are very important to users. Maybe there is, various different bugs, there are enhancements, new features. How are you all going to be prioritizing it to make sure that you are maximizing the amount of value that you are delivering to the different users and their needs? Because as you are prioritizing, you want to make sure you're looking at, for instance, the level of effort, the reach, the impact, so that you can really make sure that you are maximizing the development efforts that are going in to your different product development. And lastly, on this slide, we are going to be talking about what is stakeholder management. So really aligning what is the expectation to gain support and then ensure collaboration across teams. Because what we are also noticing is that stakeholders, they want kind of similar things to you. They want to be able to help as many people as possible, but setting the expectation, what is helping as many people as possible? And how do we make sure that we're setting appropriate timeline, solutions, and even bringing together the different stakeholders to make sure that you are creating the right solutions? Because a lot of times when we have people that are understanding our users, doesn't mean they're always the people who are going to solutions, because a diverse amount of people that are bringing to the table what could be potential brainstorming ideas to solutions will actually create the most innovative ideas. And if you haven't heard of product management before, it's not a surprise. Product management is actually a fairly new practice. I think about 20 years ago, like in the early 2000s, that's kind of when like it started bubbling up. I think it was Google who kind of structured it a little bit. And that's when companies start to kind of pick up like, oh, maybe this is the thing. But I think around actually 2010, that's when the Agile Manifesto came out. But in general, what also came out was some statistics about companies that are running product management have about 34% higher revenue if they have solid product management practices. So that's when companies really start like, oh, wait, we need to invest in this. And product management has grown rapidly ever since. Now you might be thinking, well, Sabina, why are you talking about corporate and revenue? That's not really how we operate. Well, product management is actually really important in government practices as well. So if you think about it in this way, government and what we are developing might not be tied to revenue, but it is still tied to what we are delivering to the people in Colorado or whoever your users are. Because we still focus on user-centered solution, we need to really understand that we are solving problems that have real needs. And we are really looking at this to be able to increase the satisfaction score or understanding are we solving the problems for those users. Secondly, one thing that I think is actually really important is product management actually allows us to be much more cost effective and efficient, making sure that we are spending tax dollars in a really good way. I don't know about you all, but how many times have we gone through like a vendor contract, not actually knowing exactly what we're asking for, understanding the entire background process or what the entire background of the problem is. So the better we understand the problem, the better we understand our user, and the better we know what we're asking for in terms of strategic alignment, the less overhead we're going to be having, the less back and forth we're going to be having, and also making sure that we are creating something that has a sustainable and long-term vision in mind, instead of just looking at project to project to project that might not be aligned into the overall goals that the entire organization, department, or agency, or even the state might be setting. Third, a data-driven decision-making. This both is equally as important in private sector as it is in public sector. So we want to be sure that we are validating our initiative. Why are we doing that? And is it actually working? So when we have this data, are we making informed decisions based on that data? That data can look in various different ways based on your industry and your users. But for instance, if you take the example of how are your users actually navigating your platforms? How are they looking at the satisfaction score? So maybe it's not necessarily about program efficiency, but how is the user behavior actually being showing patterns on your statistics and on your analytics so you can make informed decisions and capture those anomalies, capture those pain points before a customer or a user is coming to you, knocking on your door. 4, being able to be agile and responsive. And this is part of being in an iterative process. So one of the things that I kind of notice a lot when we are in government, we think a lot about projects as a one-time thing, and then we kind of close that project. But that's not really what product management is about. We really want to make sure we are iterating, we are learning, and we're continuously growing both our practices and our product. So if you think about it this way, when you have product management in-house, you're understanding your users, you're understanding your data, and just by the two of these, you can continuously iterate and improve and understand what you are going to try to tackle next based on those two data points. So this is an ever-evolving process that you can have in-house, and that's why it actually brings that the agility to use, because you can more quickly make decisions based on the data point instead of waiting for a project to close or a new one to open. Accountability and transparency. So because you are now starting to track a lot more analytics, you're also able to make more informed decisions by surfacing the measurable outcomes. And when you have measurable outcomes, your tracking process, you can demonstrate the results a lot better. So as you are learning, as you are iterating on this process, you can also set clear milestones and outcomes. And then by surfacing those initiatives, you can also be much more transparent to the different people that you are reporting up to or reporting out to. And last but not least, I also really want to talk about innovating for public good. by being able to really understand your users and their pain points and bringing together different stakeholders and partners that you're collaborating with, you are actually able to encourage new ideas and looking at technology in a way to really solve for the public in an innovative way. So product management is a practice that brings in people from a diverse background to be able to get the right type of solutions for the real problems that are out there. So some of this might sound familiar to y'all. And it might be you have product managers in your organization. It might be that you have product owners in your organization. And I want to talk a little bit about the two different here. And I think we're also going to be posting a prompt here that asks you, are you actually having product related roles existing in your agency today? So feel free to add to it. And these, so product manager and product owner is kind of what I'm going to be talking about right now. And so a product manager really is looking to define what is the product strategy and why it matters from a strategic perspective. Product owners, on the other side, they are looking more on the how a product vision will be realized from a day-to-day perspective and really focusing on that incremental value. Product managers, they're looking much more on the long-term strategies. We're looking like multiple years out, and how are we going to be getting there from a long-term perspective? While product owners, they're much more on a tactical level, and they're sitting closer to the feature and enhancement, making sure that we're delivering it on a shorter time frame. But when it comes to like the high-level decisions and long-term vision and aligning that with the organization, you're looking much more to a product manager. In general, the way that I like to think about it is that product managers are much more outward facing and user oriented. They spend a lot of time with their stakeholders. They spend a lot of time interviewing users and really digging into the data to understand that user behavior. While product owners, they're much more inward facing. So they sit a lot more with developers, understanding the acceptance criteria of different Jira stories, or understanding how to get those deliverables across the finish line that make sure that it serves the kind of business need. So I have been talking a lot about user focus and users, and that is something I'm probably going to continue talking about for a long time, because users are really kind of at the core of why we are doing this. And talking about what is user-centered design is really focusing on how do we increase the user satisfaction, how do we reduce the development waste by focusing on what truly matters to users. And really, we want to try to uncover those insights through user feedback. And I want to really emphasize that this is not about solving support tickets. It's not about just solving who is screaming the loudest in their pain points. It's about understanding your entire user base and understanding where they're at in their journey. So really want to be able to understand how do we have that active or even proactive understanding of our user. It might be that we actually are really needing to sharpen our skill in how to listen to a user, because a lot of times what a user will be coming to us for is hey, I have a problem. This is the solution that I want. Solve my problem by this solution. But when you actually sit with your user and actually try to understand where are they at in the journey, you might be uncovering that there's a completely different problem that we can solve in a very different way. So by having a really strong empathy and strong listening skill with your user, you can apply problem solving in a very different way by really addressing what is at the core. And this is really something that takes a lot of iterative design. Takes a lot of testing, because you want to be able to generate feedback, not just on what is the proposed solution, but also really taking into consideration, once it's been lost, this is solving for all the different problems and users that you are intended to solve for, and making sure you're continuously evolving your practices and the product based on the feedback. I do also really want to emphasize here, I think a lot of us here at the state at least have been talking a lot about accessibility and inclusivity. So this is also a core part of user-centered design. And so once we are actually talking to our users, are we talking to the users who might not have at the same type of voice? There's a lot of people there that might not be the majority of our user, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be taking them into consideration as well. So how do you define who are the users, and are you meeting the user needs, even if they might not have the same types of background or background context. So making sure that you are understanding your user, not just from an individual perspective, but also for those people who have varying abilities. Okay, so I've talked a lot about what is product and user design, but I think that there are a lot of people kind of come to us and thinking, well, I actually understand my users and I understand them really well. And this is where I want to talk about why product vision is actually really important. So I have this analogy of if there's so many people in an organization and they are really, really understanding their users, but are we still designing what is actually being useful for that user? Think about it in this case. Let's say that every single program lead or team lead in your department gets to design their own room and house. And they have all these beautiful ideas. They have this great imaginative, they are real problem solving. So you end up with a house that have all these wonderful different rooms. But if you don't have a good holistic strategy of what that entire house is going to look like, and all those different leads for all those different rooms knows how to talk to each other and set the right type of expectations, you might end up with a house like this on this slide. You might end up with a house that looks on the surface really beautiful, but is it really functional? Is this something that someone actually wants to buy? And is someone actually going to live in here? And is this going to work for their lives? So you think about it this way. The product vision is basically how your architecture and how you're designing that entire house. You might not be there, setting up the different walls and assigning what is the wallpaper going to be in the individual room, but you're going to be creating a strategy for what is that house going to accomplish, who is the user you are designing for, and how can you make sure that you are going to be able to meet the need of the person who is going to be buying this house. So really think about it from what is the North Star and how are you going to be like setting that architecture blueprint for that house. So if you think about it this way, when you want to try to create a product vision, first, always understand the user. I am going to be emphasizing users every single slide probably. Second, defining the problems and the opportunities, understanding what is going to be your agency goals and mission and really aligning yourself with it. Brainstorming with cross-functional teams. Again, I want to emphasize, usually the best ideas are not coming from a single individual. The best ideas are coming from collaborating with a diverse group within your agency. Might also be outside of your agency, but making sure you're getting inputs from various different types of stakeholders and testing with users. Creating a vision statement, and then validating and refining. A product vision is never done. The product vision is something that is ever evolving and is coming based on your users. It could be based on what's happening in the market. It could be based on what's happening with your partner agency. It can also be what happened within your agency, or even, on other, it could be on other type of legislative mandates that are coming in. Okay, so we're going to go over to the next slide to talk a little bit about data-driven decision-making. And data-driven decision-making, I feel like it's almost as iterative as all the other slides. We have a lot of KPIs and goals that we want to meet, but a lot of the KPIs that go are really originated from real data points. So I think the one thing that is really key for product management is you need to start setting up your data collection, understanding what is the behavioral data that you're trying to capture and the contextual data of your users. So I think those two actually does give you a pretty good understanding of who are your users. So let's say that you're looking at clicks and users pattern using maybe Google Analytics or something like that. And this could be on how people are navigating on your website. If they're going through a particular user journey, funnel, where are they dropping off? Where are they having problems? And then you can actually capture a lot of the majority, seeing like, hey, we are expecting our users to go on this particular happy path, but they are dropping off here. Or they might not be spending time on this site. Or maybe this site that we find very valuable, no user is finding to it. So how do we make sure that we are streamlining this process and making good decisions based on that? Secondly is the contextual data, and really here understanding your demographics, understanding who you're trying to serve, understanding those people who might not have gotten feedback to you yet, and how do you make sure you are getting feedback from a well-rounded perspective from your users. And you really want to make sure by having both the qualitative data and quantitative data, you're getting a full picture of your user interactions. Now, secondly, and I think this is actually a key part to a lot of the things that we do in our day-to-day life, we do collect a lot of data, but how are you making sure that you're turning data into insights? And then after that, that leads to an action. So for instance, if you have quantitative data, you have qualitative data, how do you actually understand those are pain points? How do you understand those are behaviors? And how to make sure you are turning those into actionable insights? So you're looking at, for instance, frequently used features or drop-offs, or even if you're trying to, let's say, the use case of sunsetting something, how do you make sure that you are sunsetting things in the most appropriate way to make sure that you are not causing frustrations for your user as well? And once you actually have started to identify a lot of these data collections and those insights, this will actually help you create your KPIs and your goals. And that could be towards user engagement, retention rate, conversion rate, or customer satisfaction. Because no one likes, to create KPIs and goals out of thin air. That is always very scary, especially when we're trying to hold ourselves accountable. But once you actually have data collections and insight, you're going to be much more confident and comfortable setting those types of KPIs and goals. And then based on all the things that I've been mentioning today, I do want to hit on two very, very important things. Product management is a lot about being proactive and iterative. Proactive when it comes to seeking new opportunities in terms of product, process, and also grasping onto what is the user experience instead of waiting for when issues come to you or feedback has been surfaced to you. You want to be able to be a couple of steps ahead before your users are coming to you with problems, or even your stakeholders are coming to your process. How do you make sure that you have a proactive mindset? And product management is a great way to start having a proactive mindset. Secondly, is the iterative approach, really making sure that you are gathering insights, feedback, and data to improve both the product management practices and also the actual product. So now if you feel like, hey, this all sounds really wonderful and great, how can we get started with it? Well, everything kind of starts with leadership buy-in. So I think if you're interested in starting with product management practices or even growing product management practices within your organization, aligning with strategic objectives of where is product management going to be effective here, and understand what is going to be the agency missions and how can you structure a product management practice to help achieve those goals. Another thing that could be helpful for leadership is to run a pilot program. So this could be a smaller project that can be on a smaller scale to really demonstrate those tangible benefits. And this can kind of serve as a proof of concept in a low risk way or a lower risk way for leadership to really see the impact of it before they go all in on product management. And it's going to be very timely because Rose is going to be talking about one of those pilot programs that we were running here at CDEC. And it's going to be, it's a really, really wonderful pilot program that I hope you all have a lot of really great questions, because I think that's a really great example of how you can run a pilot program with a lot of tangible benefits. And then this really was one of the things that kickstarted product management become a real structured practice here at CDC. And once you have run that pilot program, you will then be able to present the data on your findings. And there, I think you can kind of like snowball from there, because now you're going to have an understanding of our users, how you've been running your user satisfaction, the cost structure, and the improvement of the cycle. Okay, I am going to be handing it over to Rose. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Sabina. And I know we have another poll here. So before I get started, let's kind of go through this poll. How prepared do you feel your agency is to embrace a product-based approach? And as you all answer that, I am personally very excited for Sabina to be at CDEC. Just hearing kind of her user-centered focus, data-driven approach. Just super excited where CDEC is going to go now that Sabina has left the private sector and has joined the public sector.
All right, there are your results.
Awesome. Okay. So how prepared do you feel your agency is to embrace a product-based approach? Looks like nobody selected very prepared. So that's this really interesting data to have of like, and even what does very prepared look like could be a good question to ask. Somewhat prepared, that's majority there. Neutral or needs improvement. I don't know if anybody, just while we have a second, wants to put any comments in the Q&A or in the chat around what somewhat prepared looks like for you, or what would you hope to see from kind of leadership in your agency. So I'll give you all a couple seconds to see if we get any comments there. Sharon, I'll put you in charge of, if anything comes in, let me know.
Will do.
All right. Awesome. So as Sabina mentioned, Propeller has been working on Universal Preschool for the last year, and it's just been really exciting to be part of CDEC, which stands for Colorado Department of Early Childhood. And so I've been like immersed in the weeds of UPK, so I want to make sure I set the foundation of what UPK is before I go more in detail around what our work looked like. So just to kind of like set the basic foundation, legislation was passed in 2022 that created a new department in Colorado called the Department of Early Childhood and Universal Preschool. So what this meant is that we had to look across all different departments in Colorado. So Department of Human Services, Colorado Department of Education, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, understand what different departments were doing early childhood work. And then we had to say, okay, we're going to pull XYZ components into this new department called Early Childhood. And we're also going to start a brand new program called Universal Preschool. So really exciting work, kind of Colorado doubling down on the importance of, 0 to 5, which is, as hopefully everybody knows, is really critical times for children. And so that happened in like a 6-month period. It is like an amazing testament to the staff at Department of at CDEC that they were able to like create this legislation and stand up a universal preschool digital product in 6 months. So what is universal preschool? It is a very common question, and I wish it was like a very simple answer, but it's a little bit nuanced. I'll give you the basics. So universal preschool means that every child in Colorado who is in the year before kindergarten, if their childcare provider is registered with Universal Preschool, they can get 15 hours of preschool each week paid for. So everybody in Colorado is eligible for 15 hours of free preschool. And then based on several factors, income, if your child has an individualized education plan, other factors, you might be eligible for 30 hours of free preschool. So we kind of have these chunks of hours that different people are eligible for. That can also kind of shed a little bit of light on the complexity of this system, that we have to understand who fits in which buckets. And then lastly, as you all may experience yourselves, like state is an amazing system, and sometimes things are siloed, right? It's government. We have silos that we sometimes have to navigate. And so we had amazing staff at Colorado Department of Early Childhood who know the ins and outs of early childhood. But we had to like add on to that knowledge. How do you actually stand up a digital product where families all across Colorado can sign up for preschool, where providers of all different sizes across Colorado can put their program into a web-based portal and make sure families know about their services. There's something called LCOs, which is kind of early childhood councils in every county, and we had to, get them on board. And then there's also a group called AUs, where they work with the Department of Education around making sure our children with individualized education plans get the services they need. So there are a lot of different moving pieces, and none of those pieces existed before this legislation. And so it was a real testament, again, to this group to say, we have a mandate, and how do we get it done as fast as possible? And to basically start wearing the caps of owning, of kind of what Sabina was talking about, product ownership and product management. And they didn't have any background in kind of digital product management or ownership. So it's kind of just an incredible program that is in year 3. And I'll talk a little bit details of how we've progressed from year 1 to year 3. So product management at UPK. So to get a sense of kind of year 1, this was, as I said, it was a fast moving machine. We had to stand something up in about 6 months. So really what Sabina, mentioned is this was a pilot program, right? This was a minimum viable product, an MVP of we need to get as many kids this free access to childcare or preschool as quickly as possible. And so to launch that, it really meant that a lot of the kind of actions were not automated. Like automated is of course where we want to get to, but what we did is it kind of became a database of here are all the providers, here are all the children, and behind the scenes, there was a lot of manual effort that was still needed in that year 1 to actually get the program stood up. Again, even with all of that, like how fast I had to move and how little knowledge we had around product within CDEC, they were still able to enroll over 30,000 kids in Universal Preschool in that first year. So it's really incredible. In year 1, we were also talking about we had to choose a platform to make sure we knew kind of what existed, like kind of a market analysis of what platform to use, what were other kind of organizations across the state using, so we could potentially have integration as we move into year 2 and year 3. Again, kind of going off what Sabina was mentioning of having a long-term strategy. And so again, you're in the present moment trying to stand something up, but you also have to be aware of where this program is going in the long term. And then quite honestly, like as much as I would have loved it, we just didn't have the time to have a user-centered approach, right? It was just like, how do we get something out the door that meets at the bare minimum of the need? And so going into year 2, that was really a big shift that we were able to make of, okay, we have this basic product, we have a platform, we have, providers registering their programs, we have families signing up for programs. And now, there was some media that was not as positive on UPK. And so we heard from users, the customers, that things weren't working as well as we would like. So that is when we said, okay, in year 2, how do we really understand what our users need? And that was actually when we began to realize that we had more than just 2 customers. Initially, it was the families as a customer and the preschool providers as a customer. But then we realized, oh, we also have LCOs, these early childhood councils in each county. We also have these AUs, which are run by Colorado Department of Education. So actually, let's do some investigation. Let's do some interviewing, some focus groups, some surveys to really understand what all of our different customer needs are. And as Sabina mentioned, like diverse stakeholders, actually, when you get them together, we get a plethora of diverse ideas. And so we really felt like by asking more and more people how we could continue to improve this product, the product's going to continue to get better and better. I'm just looking at my notes real quick. So in this kind of year 2, a big change that happened was around matching. And so if you can imagine, you have a provider and you have a student, and that student or family wants to go to this provider, that's called a matching process. And that was probably the biggest pain point that we had in year 1. And so in year 2, we really looked at that kind of matching process and said, how could we improve? And so one of the really simple improvements we made was that we created something called continuity of care, which meant that if you were at this preschool for years 0 through 3, you could stay at that preschool. You'd be guaranteed a spot as you went into that preschool year. And so that was a huge improvement. And that actually helped solve about 75% of our matching problems. So that's an example of kind of using a user-centric approach in year 2. We are about to launch year 3. I can't reveal the exact date, but it is coming soon. And so it's been really exciting as Sabina mentioned, we've been able to take an iterative product approach, right? So year one was like minimum viable product. What can we do to just like meet the basic needs? Year two was let's listen to all the pain points. We kind of look at where the biggest kind of product enhancements we can make to try to eliminate some of those pain points. And year three has been, how do we continue to iterate based on our unique customers' needs? So I would say that year three, we've kind of been able to stabilize the product, and now we're really looking at iterations. Awesome. So I see in the audience that there's some people who have seen my spiel on human-centered design before. So this is a little bit of more of a focus on what this looked like with UPK, but I'm glad to see some fans in the audience. What did kind of user-centered design or human-centered design look like at UPK? So what this looked like, Propeller came in the beginning of year two. So what this looked like, they said, okay, we know that we were kind of just meeting the basic needs in year one. Let's take the time to listen to our customers and understand what they really need. And again, and also expanding the idea of who our customers are. So we have a really diverse group of people that we are talking with and understanding. And then what we did is we said, okay, we gather all this data, we kind of create some themes. And then what that does is that helps inform what product enhancements we're going to focus on. So as Sabina mentioned, specifically around like cost effectiveness and efficiency, it's like we only have so much money and there's a lot of product enhancements we have to get to. And so by listening to the customers, it helped us say, here's the product enhancements we're going to prioritize. And then we work with our platform to say, what could this look like? How could you build this out? And then that's kind of the design element of what is possible. And then we work with our platform, BridgeCare, to actually build out kind of an MVP or something that we can go test with our users. So then we build it. And then what we would go do is go back to families, go back to the LCOs, go back to providers and say, hey, is this meeting the need? Are we hitting the mark on how we can improve our product? And then we would iterate based on their feedback and kind of, again, finally build out in the product so it would go live. And then this process continues over time. So once we iterate, we then go back to our customers and say, hey, now this is live. How's it sitting with you? Did this solve the need? If it did, great. Let's go to the next thing on our list. If not, what do we need to do again to design, build, test, and iterate? So we always think of this as an ongoing cycle within the product world. Awesome. So here's some examples of product iteration that we've done in UPK over the last year. So we've integrated meaningful feedback. So specifically, I mentioned the AUs. They are part of Colorado Department of Education. And that means they have different processes and systems than the Colorado Department of Early Childhood. So again, it's like sitting down with them and really understanding what are their processes and systems, what are they required by the state, what are they required by the federal government. And so trying to meet those needs and then looking at our product, looking at our own systems and saying, can we automate this? You know, how do we get you this information? And so what we were able to do is really actually like a basic thing is they couldn't see the students who are enrolled in Universal Preschool. So it's something as simple as changing the permissions in our product to allow AUs to actually see which of their students were enrolled in UPK. Because the AUs really focus on students with individualized education plans, we want to know which students are not enrolled so we can then go and say, hey, how do we get you enrolled? What's going to be the easiest way? What's going to be the provider that can meet your needs? And so again, just by doing something as simple as changing a permission, we really helped AUs be involved in this process and be able to serve the children of Colorado. Next year is prioritize impactful enhancements. So as I mentioned before, matching process is a very complicated system in Colorado. And so we kind of definitely saw that in year one, it was not a perfect solution. This last year, in year two, we kind of created several different things. We created that continuity of care. So if you were in a daycare for when you were, 3, you can go to that same, and they have a preschool, you can go to that same preschool and have continuity of care for when you're 4 years old. So that solved a ton of problems. The other thing we did is we created something called direct enrollment, which means if you are a parent and you have a 4-year-old, you can walk into a preschool provider in your neighborhood, and if they have a spot for you, you can enroll immediately, and that provider can actually help you enroll in the UPK program. And so that really helped a ton of our families that might not be have a mobile phone or might not have internet at home, so they can just walk up to a provider and immediately get enrolled. We didn't want any family to ever have to wait even one day to start their child in preschool. And so those are just 2 examples of how we really we saw immediately that the matching process was not working, and we prioritized these enhancements to make sure that our families were able to get their child in a preschool as easily and quickly as possible. And then scale with intention. I think, Sabina mentioned being able to look at our product and understand, where a family might say, this is getting too complicated, I'm going to drop off and not enroll. Where are our providers in giving us the data that we need to make sure the program is working? And so using that level of data is super important for us, as well as I would say, we now have the ability to look across Colorado in real time to understand how many students we're serving, how many providers we have. Are we increasing the number of providers? Are we seeing a decrease in the number of providers? Do we know that there are, 10,000 students that need preschool in one area and we only see 5,000 enrolled? Oh my gosh, do we need to create a marketing plan to understand what's happening there? So really the power of having real-time data has really enhanced the ability for the UPK team to kind of make sure that we are finding every child in Colorado that is eligible for this program and getting them enrolled. And so both kind of having a dashboard of live data, as well as understanding through data where these pain points are, when these drop-off points are, has been really critical in us continuing to iterate on our model. Okay, so in summary, and Sabina, if you want to add anything here, feel free to, but in summary, kind of product management drives strategy, which guides product development to meet users' needs. So as I mentioned, we're super excited that Sabina is at CDEC, because I think it's only going to continue to enhance specifically what UPK is doing, because if we have a strong strategy, then we can make sure that the product owner is really moving forward with the development and the design of our product, and that there is somebody at a kind of product management level to help give us direction and strategy. I think the hardest thing that I've seen is so many people are really dedicated to services and programs in the public sector, but they might not be experts in product. And so how do we make sure that when somebody is super committed and passionate about a service or a program, how do we support them with product ownership and product management so we have real knowledge, like subject matter expert knowledge about the service or program, and then we're coupling that with a really strong product. So using data-driven approach helps us focus on real user needs. So both Sabina and I have touched on this, but again, having real quality data and prioritizing data also helps us, build buy-in with leadership. And again, having a customer-focused approach, really understanding what all of your unique customers need and trying to find that balance of how do we prioritize enhancements that help this customer, and then it's a balancing act throughout the iteration process. So using a product mindset ensures that we meet the community needs, and we use resources responsibly, which is of the utmost importance, especially in the public sector. I see a poll question has popped up. What do you see as the biggest challenge in transitioning to a product-based approach in government services? Budget constraints, stakeholder alignment, resource limitations, and cultural resistance to change. And as you're kind of answering that poll, also happy to answer any questions specific to UPK. And I'm sure Sabina is also open to answering any questions about product management, delivery, or kind of approach. Oh, interesting here. Okay. So yeah, biggest challenge, budget constraints and resource limitations. I almost think of those maybe one and the same, right? Do we have the staff and capacity and FTE? And do we have the money? Stakeholder alignment, that's interesting. Cultural resistance to change. I am intrigued by that one of kind of what is the resistance to change around like leading with a product approach? Is it a resistance around putting your resources to a product-based approach? So I'd love if people want to pop in the chat about kind of that piece. And then I'd also be curious what the other is. What's the other big challenge around this approach?
And it also makes me think about with the resource constraint and the budget constraint, resource limitation, if you're thinking about it from like a cost analysis perspective, who in your organization right now is trying to do product management but not being effective at it? And what are they instead not being effective where they should be really focusing their value on? And I think about it in this case because we're looking at, for instance, how do we do like for instance like accessibility and product design, and right now we're doing like a cost analysis of how we're going to be remediating and how are we going to be looking at ongoing accessibility effort. But what if in that case we take into consideration how do we get maybe like a product designer or someone who has accessibility expertise to kind of stop the bleeding at the very start and think about accessibility from the get-go when we are starting. So maybe this is also about how do we kind of present the information that there is value to product management, just in not just that there is an FTE and a salary associated to it, but what other costs might you be reducing by introducing one of these roles?
Yeah, Sabina, there's a question that I'd love to pose to you. So it says, my Colorado department seems very limited to integrate product thinking in awareness, planning, and decision-making. I'm curious, just from your experience at CDEC, did you have some resistance, or like how did you begin to get buy-in around that awareness, planning, and decision-making?
Well, I think originally this really started off with UPK, because in like the first year, UPK didn't really have like a strong product management thinking, and we had some snags in the beginning, and like that MVP happened, and I think CDC was really strategizing with the Gov's office, saying, okay, well, what can we do to make sure that this doesn't happen? So leadership already kind of had kind of a collaboration with Gov's office, and Gov's office was actually one of the people who were suggesting that, hey, maybe there is an opportunity here for us to try product management. So let's bring in some people with product expertise, and that is where the skill gap is today. So that's one of the reasons how this started, and then we can kind of and then that could kind of continue to evolve. Catherine asks, what's the biggest motivation to go with bridge care? So the biggest motivation to go with bridge care, I think there's a couple of different things. Bridge care, so for those people who don't know, bridge care is one of the platforms that we are running UPK on right now. So bridge care was selected because they have a kind of deep understanding of kind of early childhood space, and they have a SaaS product that we can kind of continue to iterate with, and we don't have to kind of wait a long time for development effort. There was a lot of out of the box features that were already available. And BridgeKids was a really great partner with us, understanding how can we kind of meet our users' need as best as possible as this program were kind of being stood up. So for us, it had the possibility of a good technology platform. It had good subject matter expertise. It had good collaboration and partnership, and it met all of our kind of criteria in terms of kind of the technology checklist of, can this scale? Can this meet our user needs? Does it have security? Does it have a messaging platform, etc.? So it met a lot of our kind of development efforts from the get-go. So we didn't have to spend a lot of time developing that original infrastructure, which probably would have increased our timeline pretty significantly. So we wanted to get our value out to users as quick as possible with the best type of collaboration and partnership with a subject matter expert as well.
Yep. And I think it's like, there's no perfect platform, right? Like there's always going to be some really great benefits, like Sabina mentioned. There might be some challenges with it, like integration with other systems, et cetera. And you kind of, again, have to go back to what's the product strategy and what's the most important things that we really need this platform to do.
Yeah, and I can also kind of speak a little bit extra to that. When it comes to those kind of big decisions, as kind of Rose mentioned, there is not going to be a perfect answer. So one of the methodologies that we did in employing when we are doing technology assessment is that we are building basically a comparison matrix of what are the things that matter to us. And then we have kind of listing pros and cons between the different contenders of like, okay, so this is how they kind of rank in between. And then we actually have kind of like a round table with stakeholders internally, but also sometimes actually externally. So we are kind of going in and we are voting on what matters most to us. And then so for instance, for this particular project, one of the things that were really important was getting value to users as quick as possible. And also recognizing like, where can we have a lot of, where can they kind of bridge our skill gap that we currently had at the time? So there was a lot of back and forth, and there was a kind of a big decision matrix that kind of helped lead that technology decision, because we recognized that there was not going to be a perfect answer. And then also recognizing, how are you going to be able to have a long-term sustainable partnership where you can continuously evolve with someone as well, because that was also something that was quite crucial for us. And I think that that is also one thing that kind of led to a much more successful year 2 and year 3 for us with BridgeCare and UPK.
Yeah, I love that, Sabina. And I feel like that approach answers a little bit of Mark's question here. So Mark said he answered other, and whether developing a product or buying a product, there are many people / organizations that work to solve the problem without first understanding the problem. I love that. I see that as a challenge. So I love Sabina's approach. And then what we always say is, in human-centered design, there's a problem space and there's a solution space. And if you, as you're mentioning, Mark, like people think they understand the problem and they might not have done the research to truly understand the problem. And then in our problem space, so we have to understand really what's going on. And then at the end of that problem space, you want to have, as Sabina kind of really talked about, really strong problem statements that you're driving towards. You don't want to come out of that problem space with 20 problems. You want to say, here's a 3 that we're going to prioritize right now. So I love that call out around like, we try to solve problems within our own silos and with our own knowledge and lived experience without really understanding the problem deeply from our user's perspective.
I 100% agree with that. And I think also it's a culture thing too, understand the problems statement and understanding the problem area in general. And I think that, over the last couple of weeks, we've really been trying to be more rigid about saying, hey, we're not here to solution, we're here to understand the problem. And sometimes we'll even have that in our meetings. We're not here to solution, we're here to understand the problem. That is what we are here to do right now. Because a lot of people, rightfully so, wants to get into solutioning, but that might not be the most productive thing if you're really trying to understand the problem.
Yeah, I see something from Josephine here about cultural resistance. Let me kind of look through it real quick. And I'll read it out loud as well. I think for my department, our department grew so fast. And as many public servants, many of us are overburdened. yeah, very, very normal in the public sector. So getting buy-in to change our processes is incredibly difficult because even if it helps our products in the long run, it's an immediate additional burden to programs to learn new processes, especially when they don't have UI, UX expertise. They think our current products are good enough. Additionally, with our massive growth in the past 5 years, we only recently started updating our standards to stop the bleeding. We now have the huge product that feels impossible to remediate internally. Yeah, it reminds me of the term like tech debt, of just like, oh man, or like Sabina's house model of like, you've been adding extensions onto this house. And now it's like, oh my gosh, like this is a beast. And how do we even start to kind of unearth what we've created? Sabina, anything to add there?
Yeah, and I think also I completely understand you when it says like it's hard to stop the bleeding when the wound has become that big. But I think here, maybe if you have the kind of approach that what are the kind of iterative milestones that are more, you know, less of a big mountain to kind of climb, but what are the smaller boulders that you can get along the way and making it more manageable task. But I also agree with you on the UI UX expertise. I think that there's a lot of people that think they know UI UX, but UX is a very specific field which takes a very specific skill set. And understanding what are the ways that we can try to encourage people to get the right resources to kind of fill that skill gap. So I completely agree with you, but I think the one thing we can do is to be able to kind of like break it down into manageable chunks. But Josephine, I'm going to kind of empathize with you. This is not a simple problem to solve, and stopping a bleeding when it's a big wound, it's challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we are at time. So I really appreciate the kind of audience engagement. Hopefully, just hearing Sabina really talk about this like high level product management, product ownership model kind of spark some new ideas. Hopefully hearing a little bit about what this looked like with UPK was also helpful. And again, Allison, Jillian, and I are always willing to talk with you all around scoping a project and just having a better understanding of how we can continue to help public sector move to a product-based approach. Sabina, anything to add?
Yeah, just thank you so much. If you have any questions, y'all can feel free to reach out. Happy to answer any questions later on as well. It's a meaty topic for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.